Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here for our presentation. My name is Spencer LaBelle, and I work at SCS Engineers. I'm here with my colleague, Mark Hammers, and today we're going to be talking about environmental compliance plans for airports in Illinois. We're going to be specifically talking about stormwater pollution prevention plans and spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans and how they apply to Illinois airports, and some helpful information that we think you'll gain a lot of knowledge from. So I'm going to hand it on to Mark, and he's going to open us and talk about the SPCC plans.
All right, thanks, Spencer, and good morning, everyone. Thank you. So my presentation today will focus primarily on the SPCC history, applicability of the SPCC, some compliance elements, and most importantly, we're going to be defining the boundaries of a facility and how this definition can uniquely impact airports and the challenges associated with that. All right, so in accordance with the Code of Federal Regulations, the US EPA requires certain facilities to prepare, implement spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans, SPCC for short. These SPCC rules are designed to protect the public health, public welfare, and the environment from potential harmful effects of oil discharges. These regulations were enacted as a result of an Ashland Oil Company spill in January of 1988. In summary, the 4 million gallon oil storage tank leaked and contaminated drinking water. These regulations do focus primarily on facility-rated oil spill prevention. They are largely performance-based, which does allow flexibility in meeting the rule requirements to prevent discharges, although this intentionally broad language can cause confusion, as we'll see later on in my presentation. So, do you need a SPCC? The first two criteria for SPCC applicability are going to be an aggregate above ground oil storage capacity of 1,320 gallons in 55 plus gallon containers, and an underground oil storage capacity of 42,000 gallons. Under the Clean Water Act, oils defined as any fats, greases, vegetable oils, petroleum, synthetic oils, oil mixed with waste. Examples that you may come across include aviation fuel, cooking oil used in food production, hydraulic oil. I do want to note that EPA does regulate mobile refuelers as mobile portable containers under the SPCC rules, if they operate exclusively within the confines of a facility. So for example, a tank truck that moves within the confines of a facility and only leaves the facility to obtain more fuel would be considered to distribute exclusively within one facility and be subject to the SPCC rules. Lastly, for applicability, the facility must reasonably be expected to discharge oil into navigable waterways or adjoining shorelines of the US. Now, the rule does not define the term reasonably to be expected. It's up to the owner or operator of each facility to determine the potential for a discharge. When looking at this potential, you should consider the location of the facility in relation to streams, ditches, gullies, stormwaters, and the volume of material likely to be spilled. So what are some key SPCC compliance elements? First and foremost is secondary containment. The secondary containment system provides an essential line of defense in the event of a failure of the primary containment. The rules do allow for both passive and active secondary containment. Appropriate containment must be designed to address the most likely quantity of oil that would be spilled. So a general rule of thumb is 110% of the oil capacity for inside containers and 125% for outside containers, outdoor containers. Second compliance element would be overfill protection. This can be in the form of a high liquid level alarm, audible or visual sign, some sort of pump cutoff. You can have a overfill protection procedure for some of the smaller tanks that can be readily monitored during filling. And lastly, inspection requirements. They're generally aimed at preventing the discharge of oil caused by leaks, corrosion, failure of said oil container. The Steel Tank Institute SP001 guidance is what we typically use. It does meet all the requirements under the SPCC rules, and this requires monthly and annual inspections. What are some other key SPCC compliance elements? Security requirements in the SPCC are largely performance-based, so a facility can tailor its security measures to suit the facility's characteristics. The facility is required to document in your plan how these security measures are implemented and employed in a way that would deter vandalism or prevent unauthorized access. For training, all oil handling personnel at a facility must receive at least annual training to properly respond to spills in their workplace. The level of training, the training content and the method is up to the facility emergency coordinator, which is defined in your SPCC plan. And then for procedures, spill countermeasures and reporting, depending on the nature and quantity of the oil released, several individuals and organizations must be contacted by the facility emergency coordinator in the event of a spill. This should be clearly defined in your SPCC plan. It should have circumstances, instructions, phone numbers, and the federal, state, and local agencies that must be contacted in the event of a spill. So, how do we define a facility and how do we define the boundary or an extent of a facility? Under the SPCC regulations, facility means any mobile, fixed, property, lease, structure, equipment in which oil is used. The boundary and extent of a facility depends on site-specific circumstances. Factors that may be considered relevant in delineating the boundaries of a facility include but aren't limited to ownership, management, operation of the facility, similarity in functions, adjacency, or a shared drainage pathway, so the same receiving water body. Contiguous and non-contiguous buildings, leases, structures, under the same ownership may be considered separate facilities for SPCC purposes. Factors to consider when looking at this is who has control over day-to-day operations of the facility. But please note when making this determination that EPA does reserve the right to make its own facility boundary determination after reviewing an SPCC plan or inspecting a facility. You can't draw the facility boundaries exclusively to avoid the SPCC regulations. EPA really frowns upon this. And they do expect the owners and the tenants to work together or cooperate to determine whether or not one or more SPCC plans is required. So let's take this interpretation of facility boundary and apply it to a hypothetical scenario here. If you look at this diagram, you can see located in the red circle are mobile refuelers. These are operated by a third party hired by the owner of this airport. You can see in the dark blue circle, there is a restaurant that operates a couple fryers, and they empty the used cooking oil into a 330-gallon tote. You can see located in the blue box up north, that's a private airfield with 55-gallon oil drums. Located in the green is the Air Force. They have several large tank farms in there. The lighter blue circle is a tank farm owned and operated by the airport. And the yellow square is military personnel space, kind of similar to civilian single-family residencies. So one interpretation, taking into consideration who has control over day-to-day operations, one can determine that each entity or party, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 here, would need its or could have its own SPCC plan, or should have its own SPCC plan. And that's taken into consideration who has control over day-to-day operations. A second interpretation, taking into consideration adjacency or shared drainage pathways, one can determine that all parties should be included under one SPCC plan. You kind of ask yourself, well, which is correct? Both are acceptable under the SPCC regulations. It's whatever situation best fits your facility, while taking into consideration, well, what decreases your liability in the event of a spill. Things to consider, what if a spill were to occur with the mobile refuelers while filling up at the airport tanks? Who's held responsible for that? Is it easier to have one SPCC plan in that situation or have two? Think about how the boundaries are defined for your SWPPP. Do you want that to differ for your SPCC plan? As you can see, it can be really confusing. Just remember to work with your professional engineer to define the facility boundaries and make sure that that determination and the thought process for that is clearly outlined in your SPCC plan. So, who's responsible for spills? Is it going to be the landowner or the operator, and who are you going to call? Well, starting with the simplest solution on paper would be that the SPCC plan would clearly state responsibility for coordinating spills. This would require all of the oil sources, so all 6 of those parties in that previous example, to be included in one plan. If you decide to separate the facilities, I've seen something like a memorandum of understanding work in those types of situations. Something like that would require cooperation between all those parties, and it would specifically identify who's in charge of what oil sources and who's responsible in the event of a spill. Your employees and tenants should have a role in recognizing oil spills. That goes for whether or not your tenants are included in your SPCC plan, so get them actively involved in that. And then using visual aids. Generally, we like to include some sort of spill response flow chart. That's going to outline, depending on the size of a spill, what level of response it requires, and what type of reporting it requires. Distribute this among all your tenants, regardless of whether they're included in your SPCC plan. This will allow them to appropriately respond to a spill if one were to occur. So, who's responsible for completing inspections, monthly, annual spill kit inspections? Some of the challenges of this are, how do we gain access to all of our oil sources if they're located on some of our tenants' property? And how are we ensuring that our tenants, if they are subject to the SPCC rules, how do we ensure they're completing those inspections? Well, again, the simplest solution on paper is going to have your SPCC plan clearly state responsibility for completing those inspections. Again, that requires all of your oil sources, including your tenants' oil sources, to be included in your SPCC plan. Something I've seen work is an annual audit. So conduct an audit of your tenants' oil sources to ensure they haven't added any additional oil storage capacity, and that if they do trigger the SPCC requirements, they're meeting all of those requirements. And then web-based submittals and email reminders going out to tenants to complete those monthly inspections or those annual inspections has worked well in the past as well. So, who's required to attend the annual training? Do we include all oil handling personnel, including our tenants' oil handling personnel, even if they're not included in our SPCC plan? And what content do I include in that training? Something I've seen work really well is training sessions for all tenants, regardless of whether they're in your SPCC plan, their oil sources, that is. This has been very helpful in site-wide awareness and compliance, and has led to tenants having a role in recognizing spills and knowing what to do in the event of a spill. And then I know a lot of facilities will have a large amount of oil handling personnel. Taking a tiered approach to training has helped cut back on the time spent towards training. So in summary, the boundary and extent of a facility can be very confusing. Remember that it is a case-by-case basis, and you need to work with your PE very closely in making this determination on whether or not you want to include your tenant's oil sources in your SPCC plan, or whether you want them to have their own SPCC plan. Remember that EPA frowns upon dividing up your facility boundaries strictly to avoid SPCC regulations. You can get in a lot of trouble for that. And then take a stab at some of those solutions I presented, review the practicability of those, and maybe implement those, and those could decrease your liability in the event of a spill. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. That was really helpful and very specific for things to look for in our SPCC plans. I'm going to be speaking about the NPDES permit for Illinois, how that affects your stormwater pollution prevention plans. I'm also going to be touching on airport-specific stormwater sampling. And then I'm going to round out our presentation with some helpful insight from an Illinois EPA inspection of a SWPPP at a local airport that occurred this year. So as most of you know, the Illinois EPA NPDES Industrial General Permit that most of you subscribed to expired in March of 2022. All permit subscribers are still covered under that plan, although it has expired. According to the Illinois EPA, they anticipate their new version of the permit being issued in March of 2023, and similar to the last time this permit was updated in 2015, it will be submitted for public comment. That may not happen, and everyone might not be sent an email that it is for public comment, but they will update it on their website. And similar to previous years, we anticipate Illinois' NPDES permit to reflect the federal US EPA multi-sector general permit that was approved in 2021. Some of the things that we saw in the multi-sector general permit that we anticipate to show up in Illinois include public signage, that there needs to be a sign available at your site that identifies the NPDES permit number, information on how and who to request a copy of the facility SWPPP from, and then also an IEPA contact or phone number that displays who to call if a passerby observes stormwater pollution. This is new, and we anticipate that this might show up in the Illinois NPDES permit update. In addition, there was a note in the federal US EPA NPDES permit that facilities that have historically sealed their pavement with coal tar seal coat are going to be asked to sample their stormwater on a biannual basis for report purposes only. And in this federal NPDES permit update, it specifically called out airports. So we will see how Illinois rolls that out. And it is only for areas and paved surfaces on your property that are sealed with coal tar seal coat. In addition, something that will affect a lot of industries is the updated schedule for benchmark sampling. So the previous permit required quarterly samples to be taken for a calendar year, and if the average was below the benchmark threshold that the Illinois EPA established, you didn't have to do the benchmark sampling any longer. What we anticipate in the new permit is that everybody will have to do benchmark sampling again if it applies to their airport in 2023. And then even if you're below the benchmark threshold, you will have to resample every 4 years, where previously in the previous permit, you didn't have to sample anymore ever again. So that is a change that we expect Illinois to roll out in their NPDES permit version in March of 2023. So this transitions us into stormwater sampling at airports, and specifically at airports in Illinois. So as we mentioned previously, benchmark sampling. The requirement for airports to do benchmark sampling is if you are a single permit or a combination of permitted facilities that use more than 100,000 gallons of glycol-based de-icing chemicals and or 100 tons or more of urea on an average annual basis. So if you do not meet those requirements, you do not have to do benchmark sampling. If you do meet those requirements, you do have to conduct benchmark sampling. In addition to that, the Illinois NPDES general permit included a reference to Title 40 CFR 449, which establishes effluent limitation guidelines or sampling requirements for airport de-icing fluids leaving the property through stormwater. So what that specifically called out was 2 different airport processes. One was airfield pavement de-icing, and one was aircraft de-icing. So for airfield pavement de-icing, the qualifier is for existing and new primary airports with 1,000 or more annual jet departures that discharge wastewater that is commingled stormwater and urea. If you do have that condition, then you're required to meet an effluent limitation for the chemical constituent ammonia. And that is a daily maximum for that. So in general, that qualifier means if you use urea to de-ice your airfield pavement, you must monitor discharges of urea commingled with snow or stormwater on a daily basis. And that is difficult because discharges won't likely occur until snow melts or a freezing rain event. But that is a specific requirement that was kind of footnoted in the Illinois NPDES general permit that everyone should be aware of. And in addition, that second requirement for aircraft de-icing only applies to new airports with 10,000 annual departures located in cold climate zones, which would apply to Illinois facilities. And the requirement is that they must collect 60% of aircraft de-icing fluids after de-icing. That only applies for new airports. And lastly, we wanted to share some insight from a recent IEPA inspection of a SWP at an Illinois airport for things to be looking for in your SWP to just make sure that they're there. So the first thing is the notice of intent submittal. The Illinois EPA wanted to see our notice of intent paperwork and also wanted us to explain when we would submit the new notice of intent for the new permit. As you can see on the Illinois EPA's website, the general permit is specifically noting that it won't be submitted until March of 2023, and that you have from March of 2023 to 150 days after it's authorized to submit your notice of intent. They wanted us to explain that and describe our process. In addition, along with the notice of intent, there are 2 pieces of information that the notice of intent requires. That is a documentation from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources that you've evaluated whether threatened or endangered species and habitat are on your property or disturbed by your operation. And in addition, documentation from the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency to evaluate potential historic buildings on your property. Keep in mind those two pieces of information have expiration dates, and the Illinois EPA wanted us to update that information due to the original authorization being expired. In addition, they wanted us to provide all quarterly visual observations of discharges. Those, as you know, need to be submitted to the Illinois EPA on an annual basis. But they were checking to make sure that we were sampling and evaluating stormwater discharges during a qualifying event, where in Illinois it's 0.25 inches of rain, and that we were making our best attempt to get out there within the first hour of rainfall and have that documentation available. In addition, they specifically were asking about the best management practice inspection reports. And for airports, this is a little bit more nuanced than other industries. So this form needs to be completed on a quarterly basis, except during de-icing season. De-icing season in Illinois is considered October to April. And during those months, this best management practice inspection report needs to be completed on a monthly basis. That specifically covers how we're managing de-icing fluid and pavement de-icing materials and snow, best management practices for our stormwater pollution and preventing pollution from getting off site, and documentation that we're looking at these. So I've provided this helpful figure here with an X marked during each month when you need to complete those forms. And lastly, one of the things that the Illinois EPA wanted us to specifically note in our SWP is how snow is managed at an airport, specifically snow that's commingled with airfield pavement de-icing material and aircraft de-icing liquids. So they wanted a description of where that snow is going and how we're essentially doing our best to prevent that material from mobilizing in stormwater. They also wanted us to have a specific log for our de-icing material, or at least have a reference in the SWP of where that log can be found. And lastly, they wanted us to note where our safety data sheets were for all de-icing chemicals on site, and at least have a reference in our SWP. Now those items are not specifically noted in the NPDES permit, but they were asked of us during our SWP inspection. We thought this would be helpful to this audience as this audience operates and manages SWPs for their airports in Illinois. We thought we'd share this information for you to look at your SWP to make sure this information is in there. So to summarize my presentation, and then Mark and I's as a combination, you should be on the lookout for Illinois NPDES permit updates, and keep in mind the Illinois EPA may not submit a specific email to your airport when they update this this general permit because it encompasses other industries. So what we've done at SCS is we have this QR code here. If you scan this QR code, you can enter in your email and information that you're interested in, and we can add you to a list of folks that we will send an email out when we are aware that the Illinois NPDES general permit is updated and available for public comment. So you can use that here or take a look at our booth for that QR code. And in addition, we recommend that you review your SWP and your SPCC plan in light of the information that we've shared today. Our team at SCS is available to help review your documents, provide recommendations, and answer questions for you regarding these two plans. So please visit Mark and I at our booth. We have cut sheets with some of our staff and their contact information and expertise. And we're also happy to talk about other environmental topics like PFAS, site assessments, and air compliance. So thank you for your time. And we hope that you have a chance to introduce yourselves to Mark and I, and that we have a chance to connect. Okay.